The purpose of today's hearing is to hear from tribal leaders and from the Bureau of Indian Affairs about the opportunities and challenges for public safety in tribal communities. Everyone deserves to feel safe in their community, yet that is not the case for so many tribal reservations. Adequate public safety should not be seen as a privilege, it should be considered the status quo. Adequate public safety and law enforcement in Indian country has been a long-standing issue. Native people experience violence at a higher rate than other communities, with 4 in 5 Alaska Native and American Indian adults having reported facing some form of violence in their lifetimes. That's an overwhelming 83%. We all have a responsibility to see what we can do to better these circumstances. Today we'll look at 3 main issues that affect public safety in tribal communities: recruitment and retention of law enforcement officers, jurisdiction over crimes in Indian country, and how external issues such as the influx of illegal drugs have an impact on Indian country. The BIA and tribal law enforcement agencies have faced long-standing challenges to recruit and retain qualified law enforcement and public safety personnel. In fact, in meeting with various tribal members over the last 10 months, this has been one of the primary issues that they have raised with me as chairman of the subcommittee. There are many factors that drive this trend, but many of the people who have talked to me cite a lack of parity for pay and benefits compared to other federal law enforcement agencies, the long background check approval periods, the number of qualified applicants that they're receiving, and the remote locations of many of these positions. Ensuring barriers are removed so that everyone is on a level playing field is strongly needed. Jurisdiction over crimes in Indian country is also complicated and could implicate tribal, federal, state, or local authorities, depending on the perpetrator's identity and the nature of the crime. When there is a question over which government is able to investigate or prosecute, it's oftentimes that the period of investigation may be lost. When concurrent jurisdiction exists, there may be lengthy discussions over which government should prosecute a particular crime. And if only one government can prosecute and declines to do so for various reasons, justice may be denied. The need for jurisdictions to work together on information sharing is also important. External factors that affect communities across the United States, like the influx of illegal drugs, can have an outsized impact on Indian country. I'm sure our witnesses will touch further on this devastating topic, but I do want to share a few statistics with you today. The Albuquerque Area Southwest Tribal Epidemiology Center found that the Alaska Native and American Indian mortality rate for opioid use was 38.7 deaths per 100,000 in 2021, while the national average was 20.1 deaths per 100,000. So it was almost double in Indian country. This past August, the U.S. Customs and Border Control reported seizures of 25,500 pounds of fentanyl from October 2022 to August 2023. That's an 800% increase from fiscal year 2019, and it demonstrates the problems associated with an open border. It is obvious that this is an epidemic level issue for tribal communities, and this only touches on the influx of illegal drugs and does not cover the other external issues that can flow into tribal reservations and Native communities, particularly the crisis regarding missing and murdered Indigenous people. The outsized impact on tribes is due to challenges they already face, like jurisdiction and the lack of law enforcement in their communities. There are opportunities to improve collaboration and coordination between enforcement agencies. We can work to find ways to recruit and retain qualified law enforcement officers and ease the impact of external issues on Indian country. We must do better, and I believe this conversation is the first of many to find solutions that it can improve public safety in Indian country. Thank you to all of the witnesses for being here with us today, and I look forward to our discussion. Mr. Newland, I'd like to start with you. Would you please discuss the issues you have seen related to the BIA recruiting quality law enforcement candidates, and specifically where does the agency still need to improve its efforts in recruitment and retention?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for that question. You know, this has been a long-standing struggle for the BIA to not only hire but to retain officers. A lot of the locations where we hire direct service officers, as I mentioned in my opening statement, they're remote locations, and officers often have to work alone with outdated equipment for less pay than their federal counterparts. And so it's no wonder many choose to leave BIA in the past and go to other agencies. So we've been working to make sure our officers are at least on par with their colleagues and other agencies at the department, and that effort has begun to lower our attrition rate. And so that's one thing, but we're also working to speed up the time to hire because it takes too long.
Takes too long.
There are other tools that I would be happy to work with the committee on. You know, when it comes to location pay and special incentives and bonuses to get people to sign up to work in some of these remote locations.
Well, perhaps we can follow up with some questions as to what those other tools might be, if you could perhaps provide that information in writing.
Sure.
But, you know, over the past few years, Congress has increased funding going to Indian country across the board. How has BIA and OSG law enforcement been affected by these general increases, and what has gone specifically to public justice and tribal court programs?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So as the funding has increased for law enforcement and tribal courts, specifically, as you noted, and happy to continue to work with Congress on that. That money does help pay for new equipment and additional officers, not only for the BIA, but as I mentioned, we contract and compact with tribes, and so that funding flows through us directly to tribal governments for that. These increases, when they get spread across hundreds of tribes across the country, you know, often keep up with rates of inflation, and as we've seen states and local governments competing for law enforcement officers, you know, it's a good thing because it raises the pay for officers, but it makes it hard for any one jurisdiction. So as this funding has increased, it's allowed tribal governments to buy new equipment and hire new officers, but as we've seen in the Taloa report, we're still behind what the total need is.
Well, and again, I think that we'll have some follow-up questions for you after the hearing today. Mr. Goggles, I'd like to come to you next, and I'd like to thank you for traveling here from Wyoming. It's wonderful to see you, and thank you for engaging on this incredibly important topic. In your testimony, you mentioned that cross-deputization among law enforcement agencies is a possible solution. What are the current barriers to cross-deputization, and has cross-deputization occurred at all between any of the law enforcement agencies active on the reservation today?
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair, members. To answer the first question, on the Wyoming State Legislature in the past has put forward bills in response to that. The Northern Arapaho Tribe has always been in support of those bills, but it's our tribal counterparts, the Eastern Shoshone, who aren't up to speed with it.
Okay.
For whatever reason.
So do we have any cross-deputization that's going on at all right now?
There was a initiative in the past under the Chief Doug Nosip at the time for Wind River PD. He implemented it to the surrounding agencies, Fremont County Sheriff's Office, and I believe some municipalities. But at the time, the holdup was them going through the background and more so the adjudicial process. That was where a lot of them drew back. And so the cards were never issued, but the names were on board. But I have also heard mention in the past of some having cards but not having the authorization.
Just seems like this is a terribly bureaucratized process, and I think that is something that has to be fixed with BIA as well as perhaps with Congress, but we've got to find a way to streamline this.